Leader, thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to sit down with you, and you look relaxed. Unlike those final days in session, I thought everybody's heads were going to explode. It was stressful.
It was a frenetic pace, let's put it that way.
Well, and one that you weren't used to. I mean, as the head of the Education Committee, you certainly were not a stranger to high-end negotiations and pressure, but not education and criminal justice and rent laws and property tax and all at the same time, which is what's necessary as leader.
No question about it. I'd say two things in particular in relation to that. Number one is, I've always felt like I was a good listener, but when you sit in this chair, you have to bring it to a new level. If you're not responsive to your members, first of all, that's wrong, but second of all, you're just going to be in a bad spot. Beyond that, we are very lucky. I work with some of the most talented people who serve in government, so I got immersed in things and got a level of detail that I was unaccustomed to in certain subject areas. I mean, the education stuff, I didn't need any background on that. That was easy, and frankly, it still is. And I think part of what we had done as a conference and the work I did in chairing the committee enabled us to do some of the things at the end of session.
Yeah, more so, do you think? Because I've seen some reports about that. I mean, and certainly the education community, though they might not agree with you on everything from an ideological standpoint, is very pleased because they feel like you get the nuances and details of something that's really complex. I mean, education policy is complex and controversial. Do you think, though, with you as leader, that the conference is now focused slightly more on education than it was before?
I suppose so in a way, but look, every year when we go through the budget, you know this, it ends up essentially being the #1 issue. It would certainly, with Medicaid funding and all that kind of stuff, that eats up the lion's share of the budget. But in terms of state responsibilities, I've always felt this way, and I continue to say it now. New York's primary obligation is education, constitutionally, governmentally, and politically. So I don't think that's going to change. Do I bring, hopefully a good level of knowledge in that area? Yes.
You did well as a conference. I mean, really what you needed to do, I thought, and we talked about it on the show a bunch, was head off things that you didn't like. I mean, the priorities were mostly downstate. You've got a couple of downstate members, but not much. It was more of an Assembly Democratic focus at the end in terms of the rent laws, mayoral control, which we'll get to, but 421A, et cetera. Those things were Democrat dominated, downstate dominated. The rent laws, I guess, a little bit on Long Island and a little bit in the suburbs north of New York City, but not much. You didn't get everything you wanted, though, like the education tax credit. I assume you're going to go back on that. You put forth a bill that would have increased the charter cap, and that didn't happen either.
No, but I think we made progress in a lot of different areas. The money for the non-public schools, it's $250 million that wasn't there before. And like anything else, if I walked away with everything that I wanted, we would probably still be in session. At some point, there's give and take, as you all know. But the property tax cap, the extension of that's been a signature issue of our conference before the governor even became governor. He partnered with us on that, for sure, and I think getting that extension was very important. That has saved billions of dollars. Property tax rebates. If you and I had a discussion in February, and I said we're going to get property tax rebates before the end of the session, I probably wouldn't have said it, and if I did, you probably wouldn't have believed it. So,
probably not.
But that was a huge step forward, and that frankly materialized in the last couple of weeks. So on the whole, I think we got a lot of really productive things. And when you go back to things about rent and 421A and things of that nature, the more I met with people and the more I talked about this stuff, it really ties in a couple of basic ways. You can talk about the education stuff, which is systemic all throughout the state.
Yeah.
But 421A and rent control is arguably about affordable housing. Property tax cap, I could make a very fair argument, it's the same thing.
Well, that's why they're linked. Well, that's one of the reasons why they're linked. Yeah, okay.
But I think that there's a consistency, and while some of them may appear upstate, downstate versus the metropolitan area, I think on the whole we got a lot of good things done.
Was the governor, in fact, partnering with you to try and jam the Assembly Democrats and specifically Bill de Blasio, as has been reported or alleged by the mayor and others?
It's fascinating to read and hear people's interpretations about events that they had no part in. And all I can tell you is that I have now sat in a number of meetings with both the Speaker and the Governor and each of our key staff. So I know exactly what transpired. Am I going to speak about every detail? No.
What a shame.
Well, I don't want to, we'd be here all afternoon. But, did the Governor partner with us? Sure he did.
Yeah, but that's not new either.
Right. Sometimes when the people get mired in the details here in Albany and forget the fact that the public is saying, well, wait a second, He's the governor, you're the Senate, you're the Assembly. You're supposed to work together.
Right, but is it fair criticism, do you think? I mean, what the mayor has suggested and the liberal supporters that he has have suggested is that the governor is interested in keeping the Senate Republicans as a foil. He's interested in keeping you happy. He's interested in playing you off the Democrat-dominated Assembly, and he's perhaps more aligned with you, at least from a fiscal standpoint, than he is with his fellow Democrats, and therefore he's not a real Democrat in some way because he plays ball with you, basically.
Believe me, I think he is a real Democrat because there are a number of things that we just don't agree on, and there are things that we actually made sure did not happen. The DREAM Act,
right,
raised the age. The governor is doing an executive order on the appointment of the Attorney General. So, there are a number of things that arguably I could say we stopped, which I think are in the best interest of the taxpayers. But let's go back to a political observation.
Okay.
The governor endorsed, with maybe one exception, he endorsed every Democratic challenger to our Senate colleagues. He is in charge of the Democratic State Committee, which spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in a number of races. So, and I don't expect him to sit on the sidelines. I mean, I would be floored if the governor came out and said, hey, I'm going to endorse John Flanagan or any of his colleagues.
Okay, that's true, right. I mean, but he would have endorsed McDonald, for example. I mean, but that was a little bit of a different situation, right? Sure. Because of the same-sex marriage votes.
Yeah, but I think, I want to be clear. Having sat in these meetings, the governor pushed hard, both with the Senate and against the Senate. Mm-hmm. And he did the same thing for the Assembly. And in fairness, one of the things he said was, to me and to the Speaker, you guys need to work with each other. You need to put together a package that everyone can live with. And like it or not, everyone has to find ways to help each other.
So you brought up a couple of issues. I mean, next year's an election year, and it's obviously, you'll be tested, Carl Hastie will be tested. Mm-hmm. It's probably going to be a little bit harder for you, just given the margins. And obviously it's a Democratic election year, and we've been talking about how that brings out Democrats who vote every 4 years and maybe don't show up elsewhere. Yep. Although you've had success in those years in the past, so it's not out of the question. But you brought up a number of issues. DREAM, raise the age. The governor today signing an executive order regarding a special prosecutor. So criminal justice reform certainly is going to come up again, I'm sure. Right. Maybe even statewide minimum wage, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe abortion rights. I mean, these are all sort of perennial election year topics that the Democrats use to whip up their base. None of those things are revisitable for you or doable for you next year?
I believe that we have an obligation to have discussions on all of these subjects, but I also want to be clear. Where we are staking out a very strong position, I don't see that changing. On raise the age, that's a very complicated subject matter. And there are real issues. The governor talked about some things that he's going to do in an executive capacity, but we are going to have very clear differences. But I plan on doing a lot of traveling, which I've done already. I'm going to get out and meet with a lot of our members, their communities, the people they represent. I want to be putting our best foot forward with my colleagues. I want to be doing aggressive work and making people feel like we have their back. If we have a chance to succeed in 2016, it's going to be because we deliver the right message and we produce results. And I've said this phrase, real results for real people.
Do you think you can hold the majority?
Yes. I wouldn't have taken this job if I didn't think so.
Do you think it matters who's at the top of the ticket? There's like 16, 17? I don't know what we're up to now.
Sure.
Would-be candidates who are running for president?
Let's put it this way. It's more than a baker's dozen. So,
yeah, it is.
Yeah, obviously it matters who's at the top of the ticket. But, we're at a juncture, and you know how the state of New York is. A lot of the folks who aspire to become president, Republican or Democrat, they come to New York because they like the financing that they can get.
The ATM state.
Sure.
Yeah,
but I think it's important and prudent for all of those people, if they're so inclined, come to New York State. Come and visit.
Do you have a preference? Do you have a favorite?
No, and I you know what? I'm going to be very cautious in how I approach that because we have a conference, and I really do think it's important to coalesce with the members of our conference, and we probably will have, disparate interests. I'm sure we will, and with a field that big, like if I said to you, ask me right now, what do you think the consensus is of your conference? I simply don't know. I mean, the end of session. It's not like we were in conference saying, hey, what do you think of Rubio, all the other candidates? What do you think of Pataki?
Well, it might have been like sort of a break that you might have taken from discussing. Yes. But yeah, I mean, I understand the point. Just to get back to next year, I mean, obviously it's a little bit different. We'll be looking through a political focus a little bit more, a political lens of everything that you do. I'm sure that it'll be in the back of your mind, raising money, who your candidates are going to be, et cetera. But also, I mean, Bill de Blasio was a factor in the last go-round. He didn't pick the right side, obviously. And he has suggested, and the governor has suggested, that it's not a real complaint to say, well, you guys don't like him and you're getting back at him to reject his agenda because he campaigned against you in the last election cycle. That said, did you purposely do a one-year mayoral control extension to try and neuter him so he doesn't come back and,
No, I said this and I'm going to keep repeating it. He is the mayor of the great city of New York. He deserves inherent respect. I don't always have to agree with him, nor do my colleagues. And everyone should understand and expect that. And we live in a democracy. He has every right to do what he wants in terms of campaigning, supporting candidates. But like anything else in life, there are costs and benefits. And, if you come at people very hard and then you turn around the next day and say, I want your undying support, on issues, by the way, that we disagree on quite strongly.
Well, you disagree on mayoral control?
No, I disagree. I've said very clearly, I support mayoral control.
Yeah.
I do. But let's just talk about a couple of basic things. The mayor, in an earlier portion of his career, was opposed to mayoral control. I'd like to have him be able to sit down and explain why he hated it then and he loves it now.
But he never explained that to you. You never had the opportunity to have that one-on-one with him.
And I said this earlier. I chaired the Education Committee, as you well know. We attempted to put together some hearings, and we didn't get any cooperation from the administration. And at one point, they said that Chancellor Farina would come for an hour to a hearing. So when you come and you tell people, you represent to the public that you really want mayoral control, but you don't make yourself available, that tells me that you're either not serious or you don't have respect for the people that I work with. And I look at Senator Lanza, Senator Golden, Senator Felder, how they feel about it. The mayor, and look too at some of the activities that he engaged in as soon as he got into office. Within the first 6 months, there was a hullabaloo about kids and charter schools.
Yeah.
That was under his mayoral control. He's done some, I think, some very positive things, but not sure of the results yet with the struggling schools. And I've met some of the people on his education team. Chancellor Farina, to me, is an impressive individual. She has a very strong background in academia and educational professionalism. So I believe in mayoral control. I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that it's 1 year.
But do you think that, are you just going to do this perpetually? 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, regardless of who's in office?
I don't foresee that, but I also will say this. There's going to be a full vetting. And we will have hearings. And there's going to be a full discourse, a lot of questions asked, and questions that need to be answered.
What will you go back again on the SAFE Act? I mean, that when you talk about, we've been talking about de Blasio and the Democrats and their effort to whip up the grassroots on the left, whipping up the grassroots on the right. SAFE Act is something. It was one of the first things you said that you wanted to include in your end of session effort. You weren't the first choice of some of the upstaters, the conservatives. They were upset about your yes vote on the SAFE Act. You and I have spoken about this. So you're going to continue that? Because it doesn't seem like something the governor's terribly interested in. No,
but the simple answer is yes. And I think the issues that we advanced in terms of amending the SAFE Act were reasonable, thoughtful, and was a byproduct of a lot of deliberation within our own conference. It's not an easy issue, you know that. And you have very, very strong feelings on both sides. So I'm acutely aware of how people have perceived me, but I also want to dispel a lot of those rumors because I believe very clearly that over 29 years in public service, I have a strong record in terms of the Second Amendment. And I want to be able to demonstrate that to people. And I will tell you that there are a number of members of our conference who continue to feel very strongly about it. They hear it from their constituents, and we're trying to find a balance. Now, we engaged in discussions on this at the end of session.
I recall, yeah.
And in February, if people said, do you think that's going to happen? Do you think there'll be any discussions? I don't think anyone would have believed it.
We're almost out of time. I have two quick questions for you. The first one is, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the Democratic Conference and Carl Hastie and how he's a member-driven leader, if you will. That was part of the promise that he made to his conference, that he would be more of a member-driven leader than his predecessor. Do you consider yourself a member-driven leader similarly?
Absolutely.
Because there were, and you know, I know the environmental communities can be probably not pleased with this, but there was at least one bill that I could think of that didn't get out. It's the Child Safe Products Act, despite the fact that it's supported by, it looks like, enough members to pass when it gets to the floor.
Yes, and I believe we have a very deliberative process in the Senate. We have a committee structure, we can have hearings, people can hold forums, and if I said to you, I picked some egregious subject, and I said we have 42 sponsors, but I told you it was some horrible issue. Just because there's 42 sponsors doesn't mean that a bill should come to the floor.
But the Child Safe Products Act is not a horrible issue.
No, but there are ramifications, and there's a lot of detail involved in this that I know a lot more about now than I did 8 weeks ago.
Yeah.
We have members who have companies in their districts, who are significant employers, who have very serious concerns. And they're not in the business of saying, let's put out, you know, horrible things for children, but I do believe that we are going to have more discussions on that. And a lot of these issues, whether it's the SAFE Act or the Child Safe Products Act or Raise the Age or Dream, they're all going to come back. And they'll be staples for various conferences. But to your fundamental point, member-driven, not even a question.
And I guess the last question would be, how significantly do you think Senator Gallivan et al. Will get involved with this whole issue regarding prison reform in the wake of the Clinton Correctional Facility breakout?
Well, there are a couple of different things. First of all, I think I want to compliment all the people who were able to get these two individuals.
I did see your statement on that, yeah.
And they deserve a lot of credit. Having said that, it's not just crime and corrections, it's investigations. And Senator Lanza is the new chair of that committee. And you know, there's an approach to this like there was on some other stuff with the Codes Committee. So I would think if we're going to do anything, it's going to be a process. It's not going to be, no pun intended, shooting from the hip, because this stuff is way too serious. And we're seeing fallout right now. I think the governor's probably going to take action on his own. The federal government is obviously doing an in-depth investigation. And that probably gives us a chance to figure out exactly what we want to do and do it in sync to the largest extent possible. So it's certainly not just crime and corrections. It would be something that would have to be supported by our conference.
And it would be something you'd do next year, not something we would see this summer, this fall?
You know, I don't dismiss the possibility of doing something this year. I think the summer is probably too early.
It's half over already.
Yeah. So let's put it this way. We're not going to be afraid to take action if we need to, but we're going to be judicious and thoughtful in our approach.
Well, Leader, we look forward to seeing you more upstate. You sort of hinted at the fact that you'll be doing more traveling, and until we see you again, I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.